सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
In a very famous interview in 1973, that was between his really momentous tenures as Richard Nixon's national security advisor and then Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger had said that diplomacy is his favorite game. Now, this is such a favorite game with him that he cannot stop it. He cannot stop playing it even at the age of 100, even past the age of 100. So, past the age of 100 now, he lands up where else but in Beijing. And then see what happens. He lands in Beijing in the wake of several top American officials. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been there, the first Secretary of State to go to Beijing after 5 years, after 2018. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has been there. President Biden's special envoy on climate change, John Kerry, former US Secretary of State, a more recent former Secretary of State than Kissinger. He's been to Beijing. But none of them has got the kind of treatment or anything like the treatment that Henry Kissinger has got. In the same general period, a month ago at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, US Secretary of Defense tried to set up a meeting with his Chinese counterpart Li Shangfu, but that meeting was denied, mostly because the Americans still keep sanctions on Li Shangfu. So he did not meet him, but Li Shangfu in this case met Henry Kissinger. So this has set off a buzz. Just what is going on? What is Henry Kissinger doing there? We know that diplomacy is his favorite game, but is he just playing a game? Is he spending all this money, flying by a private plane just to play a game because he likes doing something? Now that is not the other thing. Kissinger may be known to play diplomacy as his favorite game, but he's also not known to waste his time. He's also a man with ideas. His mind is razor sharp, as even the quote-unquote famous Global Times, Chinese government's, Chinese Communist Party's favorite, has described it. So what exactly is he doing there, and what exactly is happening between US and China? Because there has also been this flurry of US top-level visits to China. John Kerry, for example, probably the highest level US official to go to China, and he's gone there, and he knows that China is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, and there can be no progress on climate change without China's help. Once again, he got the cold shoulder from China, or a kind of cold shoulder. The Chinese made many statements saying that they also believe that something should be done about climate change, but they'll do it in their own way and at their own pace. Obviously making it evident that they don't want to be seen to be lectured to by the Americans. The others had fairly formal meetings. That is Blinken and Janet Yellen. And as we just told you, Lloyd Austin failed to get a meeting. Now, in this situation, what's happening with Kissinger? So see what did Wang Yi said. Wang Yi is the key person, former foreign minister. He's the key person in the Chinese diplomacy and management of international relations, particularly at a time when the Chinese foreign minister has been missing with rumors of a romantic liaison having complicated things, but we know nothing about that. But he's not been seen in public now for more than a month. In that situation, Wang Yi is the key guy. So there is a quote from Wang Yi, which I pick from a New York Times story reporting on the visit. It's a New York Times story by Vivian Wang. Now, this is the exact quote from the story. Wang Yi is saying, the doctor, he has a doctorate, we know, Kissinger has a doctorate. The doctor has made historic contributions to breaking the ice in China-US relations and played an irreplaceable role in enhancing the understanding between the two countries, right? And then he goes on to say that American policy towards China needs Kissinger-style diplomatic wisdom and Nixon-style political bravery. So what's he saying? Immediately there's a lot of suspicion. I see some in the Indian commentariat also that maybe maybe what Kissinger is doing is a kind of sponsored visit from the US government, Biden administration, and he's playing a game of diplomacy, but he's doing so on behalf of Biden administration. There are other critics, particularly those who don't like China too much or Xi Jinping too much, who are saying, no, it doesn't look like that. There is, for example, Teresa Fallon, who I follow, who's a senior fellow at Chicago Council, who says that the Chinese look so desperate that they are trying now to use 100-year-old Henry Kissinger to reach out to the US. And she notes, and I'm sharing the tweets with you on your screen, you can see those. And she, by the way, is a very influential foreign policy commentator, including on Twitter. Now, she also goes on to say, and I'm sharing some of these tweets with you, she says that, look at the significance. John Kerry, who's a former Secretary of State, he's currently the special envoy of the president. He was denied an audience with Xi Jinping. Who has time for Henry Kissinger? She also notes separately that at the same time, the world is skeptical about China, and a decoupling with China is taking place. Now, the editorial point there is, and I'm adding it, that while Wang Yi says that American policy on China now needs Kissinger-style diplomatic wisdom and Nixon-style political bravery, can't the same be said for China? Because at this point, it is China under Xi Jinping that's been more aggressive, that has broken away, that has changed or appended many international understandings or arrangements, including with India, who knows it better than us in India. So maybe the same advice should be given to the Chinese also. So that just as you say that America needs leaders of the wisdom of Henry Kissinger and bravery of, or political courage of Nixon. Similarly, China also needs somebody with the wisdom of Zhou Enlai and bravery of Mao Zedong. So both sets of people, or a common intention, has to exist for a movement to take place. Nevertheless, Kissinger's visit now has made much more news than the visit of so many American cabinet officers. Now, meanwhile, look at some of the other things the Chinese have said about Kissinger. And I picked these quotes from Chinese media, such as it is. Also, Chinese Defense Ministry statement, Wang Yi's statement, other statements from Chinese government. So one quote, and all of these are in quotes. He comes here as a friend of China. Number two, he comes here to eliminate misunderstandings. And then Henry Kissinger himself, he sounded much more conciliatory than any American official or president has been lately. He's saying the two countries must eliminate misunderstandings and coexist peacefully and avoid confrontation. Then he goes on to say, no matter how difficult it is, the two sides should treat each other as equals. It is unacceptable to try and isolate the other side. Now, that is not something that will make us in India happy. But you know what? Although lately he's been very flattering towards India. In fact, for the past 25, 30 years or so, post-economic reform, a lot of people changed, and he did too. The fact is that he hasn't said very much in his life that has made India happy, going back to 1971. So in this case also, he's now sort of batting on the front foot, if this is the game he's playing, and he's trying to bring about a rapprochement, or kind of front-run a rapprochement between the US and China. Now, what are some of the other takeaways that we can find around this very heavy diplomatic activity or very heavy diplomatic game, since we use that metaphor to begin with? Number one, the Chinese have made it quite clear that they are not willing right now to resume military-to-military communications that always existed between the US and China for almost 4 or 5 decades now. Now, this also got complicated after the Americans imposed sanctions on the Chinese defense minister, many Chinese entities, including the Chinese defense minister. Why? Because they accused China of selling weapons to Russia. So I would say the Chinese have a good argument that if you have our defense minister under sanctions, that is impolite enough. How do you then expect us to have military-to-military relations or communications with you? Then you see Chinese commentary. Chinese commentary said that, look, the reason we are not doing this is from Chinese officials, because there are people in the US who are hostile to China and who are not willing. They failed, exact quote, they failed to come halfway to meet the Chinese interests. That means you come halfway and we come halfway. Usually when you're negotiating with the Chinese, that means they keep shifting the goalpost. What is halfway keeps moving towards them as you keep moving forward. But with Henry Kissinger, the view is very different. With Henry Kissinger, the view is that he is not adversarial to China. He has a razor-sharp mind. And then see the statements that have been put out by the Chinese side. Kissinger's side has not put this out yet. The Chinese side, and this is from a story in Voice of America, of which also I will share a link with you, on what she is supposed to have said to Kissinger. So she is supposed to have said, and I quote, that once again, America and China find their relations at the crossroads where they have to decide, and I quote now, where they have to decide where to go, and the two sides need to make new decisions. And once again, she's quoted as having said by the Chinese government release, and I quote again, looking into the future, China and the US can achieve joint success and prosperity. Now, what are the larger lessons we draw from this? So I will list a few for you. So number one, it tells us that the big boys, okay, that doesn't sound gender neutral, say the big powers. The big powers are rebalancing. They've now realized that their relations have become too complicated. They have too much stake in each other. They both accepted the fact that relationship between the two of them has become too strained and it is not in either's interest. So both are making their own moves while using their own kind of rhetoric. While these moves are going on, the US Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, Eli Ratner, also spoke on the Hill to the US lawmakers, saying that, and I quote again, deterrence today is real and deterrence is strong. And again, Eli Ratner goes on to say, and I quote, historic progress towards a regional posture has been made that is more mobile, distributed, resilient, and lethal. So both sides are using rhetoric as well. At the same time, they are reaching out to each other. So the big powers are rebalancing right now. You can see a course correction is on. Why? That's my second point. Because nobody wants to fight a war now. In any case, anybody who had any sort of exciting notions about fighting a war and achieving something through a war, particularly when there was a power asymmetry, we learn the right lessons from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because there was a massive power asymmetry there. What the Russians thought will be over in 72 hours has gone way beyond 500 days now, right? It's not as if China and America particularly want to go to war in Taiwan Strait tomorrow or go to war over any treaty-bound state of the US. Both will use deterrence in their own ways. At the same time, they will rebalance because the economic interest mutually is much too strong on both sides. So the third conclusion is that in today's world, nobody will put boots on the ground to fight anybody's war. That's the reason you don't find any of the allies of Ukraine, any of the backers of Ukraine putting any troops, any people on the ground. They would have done it if Ukraine was a treaty ally, which means if it was a NATO member. So once again, it's quite clear that unless somebody is a treaty ally, nobody is going to go and fight a war for anybody anywhere. That's a lesson I don't think we in India need to be reminded of that. India understands this very, very well, that India has to fight its own battles always, but at the same time, it doesn't hurt if India has an understanding, a strategic understanding with very important powers, which may have adversarial relationships with China. So if nothing else, at least their satellites are great help to us when push comes to the shove, as it happened in Arunachal just a while back when India got forewarned about a Chinese intrusion, and those fellows who had tried intruding into a particular area off Tawang were pushed back rather rudely. The next point, the US concern is that China is getting too close to Russia. Now, China and Russia are both adversaries of the US. But in today's situation, China is an adversary the US cannot take on or does not want to take on. Russia is a declining former adversary. But if the Chinese come too close to Russia, strategically, that upsets the balance with America. So that is the concern for America. At the same time, China's concern is that US is getting too involved in expanding an alliance of those nations who are hostile to China or who are concerned about China. So look at the Quad, for example. Quad has come up under the US lately, and it has come as a balancing factor to China. Now, going forward from this, what is India's concern? Just as America's concern is China becoming too friendly with Russia, and China's concern is America getting all of the adversaries of China or those who fear China altogether. Similarly, in India, exactly like that in India, the concern is about Russia going too deep into China's lap, because Russia has been a very important friend and ally for India for a very long time. There is still a very strong dependence of military hardware, and not just military hardware, but over many other issues, including in many areas of critical technology. So India would not like a situation where Russia is so isolated internationally that it has no choice but to get completely hitched with China. Next, where is India? You will ask me, where is India in this complex equation? India is in a very good place. India is exactly where it's defined its role to be. India is a swing state. If you see the Quad, 3 of the 4 members of the Quad are treaty-bound allies anyway. That is America, Japan, and Australia. So even if they set up another organization called Quad, how would it matter? It is the presence of India, which is not a treaty-bound ally of the US or any of the US-led alliances. It is India's presence that shifts the balance, or if I may use a more apt expression, which swings the balance. So India is there as a swing state. Next, what are the Chinese doing? Chinese are playing hurt and sullen, as they often do. Right now, they also think that they can afford to do it because they know their importance. At the same time, the Chinese are pragmatic. They know where their interests are, and that is the reason they are reaching out to America, but in a very different way, while looking sullen and hurt. I'm concluding this by sharing with you an interview and a column that Fareed Zakaria has done on foreign policy issues. This was following his TV interview on CNN with President Biden, where he asked President Biden that, look, you will be 81. Why are you contesting for president again? There are so many younger people in Democratic Party. Why don't you open the doors for them? And he said that President Biden said that the main reason he wants another term is because that the world today faces really complex foreign policy challenges. And someone like him, a senior statesman like him, is needed there to bring together the world's democracy, and that he's succeeding in doing so. So please watch that interview. Also read Fareed Zakaria's article. Then he says that President Biden believes that the world is now facing a challenge from autocratic states, that is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And that's why he thinks that it's his burden to bring together the democracies, and that's why he wants another term. And this has also become a polarizing issue in American politics. Again, Fareed quotes 2 opinion polls, one from Gallup. While 79% of the Democrats want Ukraine to recover all its territories from Russia, no matter how long the war goes on for, 49% of the Republicans want the war to end quickly, even if it means Ukraine conceding to Russia all the territories that it has occupied through military means until now. Similarly, there's a Pew research that he quotes that says that among the Democrats, 76% want engagement with NATO, 22% want to stay out of it. But with the Republicans, it's 49-49. It's a dead heat. 49% say stay with NATO, 49% say stay out of it. Should America be more engaged with the world? Among the Democrats, 60% say yes, 39% say no. Among the Republicans, it's reversed. 71% say no, 29% say yes. 71% no, 29% say yes. It is in that complex situation that the American presidential election is also building up. So when you see all these moves being made by the Americans, by the Chinese, and you see powers like India watching and doing their own stuff, reaching out to many sides, in this case reaching out to the US, as the Prime Minister did on his visit, you can see that this is a world where now diplomacy has broken out full time. And if it's a game that Kissinger enjoys playing, it's also a game that's very popular in many capitals, many important capitals right now.